So we are well on our way into phase three of reopening after the COVID caused shutdown, with school just a few weeks away. And as a result, I thought it'd be an appropriate time to reflect on what has happened so far with COVID, specifically related to the federal government's economic response to the crisis. Hi, I'm Josh MacEwen here with Dufferin News, and today I'm joined by Kyle Seeback, Member of Parliament for Dufferin-Caledon. Now, Mr. Seeback was kind enough to share his informed views on the federal government's response to the coronavirus, and we covered the whole gamut, back to before businesses shut down, then the emergency response itself, and then the economic recovery. We finish off by asking Mr. Seeback what he considers to be the biggest flaw with the government's response to COVID, and his answer actually caught me off guard, as he made me aware that there's a certain population in our community not getting enough support. This was a great discussion, and I was glad to have an honest conversation with someone who would speak to the effectiveness of the programs that the government has implemented, as many groups in our community know that there's been plenty of room for improvement. Anyways, thank you, Mr. Seeback, for your time. This is greatly appreciated. And as always to the audience, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy this segment of Dufferin News. Thanks. Hi, it's Josh MacEwen here with Dufferin News, and today I'm joined by Kyle Seeback, Member of Parliament for Dufferin-Caledon, and we're here to discuss the federal government's response to the COVID crisis. Hi, Mr. Seeback. Thank you for making yourself available for this. Your time is extremely appreciated. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, busy, but generally pretty good.
Awesome. Well, we'll just get right to it, and we'll start off with just the beginning of the coronavirus, right before the businesses were officially told to shut down.
Sure.
Now, what would you say to those who thought the Canadian government's response was delayed or unnecessarily delayed to the coronavirus, considering what we were seeing in Italy and we kind of had like weeks to prepare? Like, would you say
Yeah,
Canadian accept? Sorry?
yeah, I agree. I think that initially the government did not move quickly enough in order to secure our borders, in order to have mandatory quarantine and testing for people that were flying and entering the country from all over the world, especially people who had traveled to or been in China, where the outbreak had started. But the response was really slow. In fact, for quite a long time, people arriving at the airports were maybe given a piece of paper that said you should quarantine for 14 days. There was no testing being done of people for temperatures and other things, no contact tracing early on. And so I think that allowed the virus to spread much faster and much further than it could have.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like that. Would you say kind of like Canadian exceptionalism would be to blame? Like maybe we thought it wouldn't happen to us?
No, I think it was the government was caught flat-footed. They were not prepared. They did not anticipate the scale and the scope of the problem that we were going to have, and they decided to take a very cautious and timid approach. There were countries that decided to take very aggressive approaches early on. I can say New Zealand is one, Taiwan is another. They were able to very, very rapidly shut down and constrain the spread of the virus because they took dramatic and drastic action very quickly. We got there eventually, but we got there much slower than these countries did. And our infection rates per 100,000 people was much higher than countries like New Zealand and Taiwan.
Yeah, it was surprising. And so it seemed like there was a lack of direction and leadership and a lot of like empty virtue signaling. Like there was the stay home campaign, and then it seemed like there was a lot of mistreatment of small businesses. Like people were under the misconception that small businesses were getting a lot more support than they actually were getting. I mean, there was SEBA, which was a loan, and then the 10% wage subsidy. But other than that, there really wasn't much there for small businesses.
Yeah, again, I think in the initial stages, the government worked and acted very slowly, especially for support of small business. The original wage subsidy was 10% when other countries were offering 60, 70, 80%. Yes, there is SEBA, but yes, it's a loan, and most small businesses don't need further loans in order to make their businesses survive. Adding to their debt level is not a great solution. So I think these things were slow to get started, slow to roll out, slow to implement, other than CERB. I like to call things fairly. The government did a very good job on getting CERB out to people quickly when they needed it, which I think alleviated a lot of Canadian stress. But they did not offer a similarly quick and simple platform for small businesses. And I think that was the challenge that has been faced. I know just in the downtown Orangeville BIA area, I think there's been approximately 10 businesses that have closed as a result of COVID. And it's not a large downtown business area.
No, no. But speaking of CERB, like to start off with, they started off with like an expanded employment insurance, which will basically seem like the same thing that they did in the United States. And I mean, I don't really think that would have been adequate. And I mean, really, to get for small business owners to become eligible for that expanded employment insurance, like they have to become infected or have kids that had it as well. And I mean, otherwise, you would have been basically encouraged to commit fraud if you were going to be eligible for that insurance.
Yeah, you had to have lost your job for CERB or have a family member, sorry, have to have lost your job as a result of COVID, or had a family member you were taking care of with respect to COVID and sort of all of these things. It was a little complicated at first, but once the shutdowns of all the businesses was taking place, everyone was going to be eligible for those. Now, there was very little oversight done with respect to the distribution of CERB, and I think uh, there's the danger of getting money out too quickly so everyone can apply who may or may not be entitled. And we've certainly seen some anecdotal evidence that is what's happened with CERB. The number of CERB claimants certainly wasn't matching the number of people who were unemployed, the unemployment numbers. So a lot of people were claiming CERB that did not lose their job as a result of COVID-19. And I think that was the challenge of basically just saying, swear this attestation that you lost your job as a result of CERB, and here's your money.
Yeah, yeah. I was originally sorry. I was originally meaning the expanded employment insurance, which they started before CERB, like that
Oh,
original response, which again would have shut out a lot of small business owners. And a lot of them felt abandoned essentially by the Liberals' original proposal, because
absolutely.
it was very like it could have led to a lot of bad things, like again crime, addiction, abuse, suicide. Like it would have been terrible. It's a good thing that they expanded to CERB. Like
Absolutely. It was the right decision.
yeah, but how would you like to would you like to comment on the Liberals? I would, in my opinion, thankfully failed attempt to get the ability to grant broad spending and taxing powers to the cabinet without parliamentary oversight into the same bill as CERB.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they had some legitimate concerns that things financially in the country could have gone a lot worse than they were, which was the genesis of that idea. But when we were agreeing to have almost no parliamentary oversight, requesting the authority to spend infinite amounts of money without any parliamentary approval it's a very, very dangerous precedent, one that we were not prepared to give the Liberals that authority. And we fought very hard in order to make sure that didn't pass. And the challenge in this minority government is all you need is one dance partner for the government, and that's either the NDP or the Bloc. If either one of them are on side with something the government wants to do, we are left with some real challenges. Now, the only sort of card that we had in our deck was that we were trying to operate everything on unanimous consent, which allows these programs to pass quickly. If there was not unanimous consent, well, then you have to get back into some actual parliamentary work, which would have very, very much slowed down some of these programs. So we were able to use that to negotiate certain things like removing the unlimited spending power.
That's all. That's great. 'Cause, I mean, it was great to see everyone come together and actually work on what was important, and it was awesome to see that because people did get help because of it.
That's right.
Extremely important. Awesome. So I'd like to move next to the wage subsidy, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, in your opinion, was the purpose of the wage subsidy? Would you say it was more of an emergency response or part of the economic recovery, or both?
Well, I think it was just part of the emergency response. I don't think it was, I think now it's turning into a bit of economic recovery because it's been extended. But originally it was emergency response to try and keep people employed in businesses. Now, in my mind, what should have happened is all the effort and hard work should have gone into the wage subsidy to get that up and running very quickly so that people would stay employed effectively and get 75% of their wages. And even if the business said, stay home, we're not going to let you go. We're just going to pay you the 75% of your salary. That's how it was supposed to work. And if they'd done that right out of the get-go, then you would not have had so many people applying for CERB. But instead, they did the opposite way, which led to a lot of businesses having to close because they weren't eligible for the wage subsidy because it wasn't there, and they were told to shut their doors. And so I think if we had been the government, we would have looked at supporting businesses just as quickly and effectively as supporting individuals who had lost their job due to COVID-19.
Well, we've seen how that's played out in other countries that did roll out that wage subsidy quickly. Their unemployment has been able to stay like really low.
Yes.
It's a proven model now. Like it's great. It is proven. Like that's awesome.
It's the right way to have done it, and I think we have the wage subsidy. I believe it's extended until I believe it's been extended until December, but I don't have that in front of me, but I think so, and that's going to be a great bridge for businesses that have stayed. But the real challenge, I think, with respect to the wage subsidy is what's going to come next. And if you remove the wage subsidy right now, I think you would see wide-scale business failures, especially in the restaurant and service industries, where they're operating at far less than half capacity. And realistically, the only thing that's keeping them going right now is the ability to access the wage subsidy.
I I have heard the same thing from the people I've spoken to as well. I mean,
And the converse challenge, I just finished a business tour all across Dufferin-Caledon. The converse challenge is a lot of people not coming back to work because they can stay home and collect CERB, as opposed to going to work where they may get a little bit more money, but then they're working and it's summer. You know, if you had a choice to make sort of 70% of what you made and stay home for the summer, or go back to work, right? I think there's a lot of people that are choosing not to go back to work, and that's something I'm hearing over and over again, especially from small businesses in the service industry. They are having a really difficult time getting people to come back to work.
it makes like if you can't get the tips and you can't guarantee the hours or the wages, like it makes a lot of sense. So I mean, it's just rationally, it's understandable why that happens.
It's understandable why it happens, and we've just got to find ways to. And they've made some modifications now where you can earn a little bit of extra money and stay on CERB. And they're going to have to continue to look at ways to incentivize people to go back to work and support small business as we go through sort of the next phase, right? Because patio season in Canada is coming to an end in depending on where you live in within the next month or the next 2 months.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Speaking of that topic, or like getting people back to work, would you think something like back to work payments to get people back to work would be something to put on the table?
I think you have to look at a way in which to incentivize people to go back to work. And there's ways to say you can earn up to a certain amount of money and there's 100% clawback after that. Or you can look at you earn a certain amount of money and then we'll slowly claw back the amount of CERB you're making. There's a whole bunch of different ways to look at this and structure it in order to encourage people to go back to work. But at the same time, we're going to have to find ways to support businesses through this, because if we have sort of wide-scale business failure after the removal of the wage subsidy, no one's going to have any work to go back to.
Exactly, exactly. So speaking of supporting businesses, I'd like to get into the rental subsidy. Now,
Yes.
how would you judge the effectiveness of the implementation and rollout of the rental subsidy?
Abject and total failure.
Yeah. Do you think it'll ever be fixed?
No, they seem to have no interest in fixing the commercial rent subsidy. And I've heard from both sides. I've heard from landlords and I've heard from tenants. So if you take aside the bad landlords, and I've heard really terrible stories of some, even in my riding, who are asking the municipality for a break on paying their property taxes and then not applying for the rent subsidy and demanding full rent from their tenants. So, there's bad actors like that, landlords who are acting and behaving very poorly. And there's, of course, tenants who are doing the same. They're saying, well, I don't have to pay because there's, it's COVID and there's a moratorium on evictions. So if you remove those bad actors, you will hear from, good tenants and good landlords. Landlords saying, "Oh, it's so complicated to apply, and there's so much paperwork, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And then saying, "And after I do all that, I'm still out 25%." Right? So the program was complicated. Only the landlords could apply. So I just think it was very, very poorly designed, and all the evidence shows that it was barely accessed across the country.
Yeah, they like to brag about the number, but they don't like to brag about how many were ineligible or didn't get to take advantage of it.
That's correct.
It's ridiculous, in my opinion. Um, so I'd like to move on to the student benefit, like the Canadian Emergency Student Benefit, CESB. Now,
Yes.
do you think this program was necessary?
I'm not sure. I think a lot of students were able to qualify for CERB. And to be honest, I know lots of university age students that had earned $5,000 in the previous year. They were able to qualify for CERB. And I know many who were just able to get some employment to earn some money. So this one, I know we have to support students. This one was one I was not sure that they needed an entirely separate program. I thought you could have, worked it out with the current program of CERB somehow.
Well, in my opinion, like when you see something what's happened with the Weep scandal and the CSSG, the Canadian Student Service Grant, and everything that's arisen because of that, and they're talking about concern about the students, and you take the difference between the CESB and CERB, the difference is $4,500 if you go for the full 6 months on CERB versus CSB. That's just about as much as what a student would have gotten from the service grant. It's $500 less, but they wouldn't have had to go out and like volunteer during a pandemic. And I mean,
Right.
if they really wanted to talk about concern about the students, they could have avoided all of this and just given them CERB.
Well,
Am I simplifying things?
you jumped into the we scandal a little bit, which it's hard for me not to comment on, because every day we find something that is incredibly more troubling with respect to that program. In fact, there's an article that's out today that talks about how the We charity was not set up to implement this program bilingually. These are normally requirements for federal contracts. And what in fact they did do was they then contracted out the services in Quebec to another company, which is in fact a government relations slash PR firm. And now I don't know this to be true, but there are allegations in the media today that that firm contacted Liberal MPs to ask them for volunteers for the program. So I think this is going to continue to get worse. This was a horribly set up program. Effectively, it was designed to help out an organization with very close ties to the government, to the Liberal Party. There was not proper due diligence done, and there are many, many conflicts of interest. If the article out today about contracting this program out to a third party in Quebec, and that third party getting in touch with Liberal MPs to find volunteers, this is effectively another sponsorship scandal type situation that we had back in in the late 90s, early 2000s with the Liberal government.
It seems that way. And I mean, honestly, even if you remove the scandal portions of it, it seemed like a poorly designed program to begin with when you had teachers recruiting students.
And getting bonuses.
Exactly.
You could get a $12,000 bonus for recruiting students while they're collecting their salaries. It just, none of it made any sense to me.
Yeah. From the very beginning, without many of those controversies, just the program, the way it designed, seemed very flawed, especially when you saw the motives behind it and then not giving them full CERB benefits as far as the students go. So I'm almost done here, but I have a few topics left. The one that I'd like to start off with is some of this technology that's helping to help reduce the spread of COVID, such as the exposure notification apps or these AI-enabled cameras that we've seen reported on in town here. Are you supportive of these measures, or do you have any concerns?
So I'm okay with a voluntary COVID tracing app. I'm using it myself because, if I'm exposed to COVID at a restaurant or something else, I think I want to know because I don't want to potentially infect my staff, my children, or other people. So I think it's good to have these applications available for Canadians. and they can decide whether or not they want to download those apps or not.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that you've downloaded it. I mean, I've downloaded it too, and I'm glad to hear that other people are doing it as well. I'm glad that there is some support for it. That's awesome.
It just makes sense to me. I'm not super afraid of Big Brother and other things. I mean, I'm certainly cognizant of privacy, but I think this is a reasonable step to take to fight the spread of a pandemic.
I've looked into how it's designed. It seems very well designed as far as protecting privacy goes. It seems very great. It seems awesome to me.
Absolutely.
Awesome. But as far as something that's not so voluntary, I mean, I know they're getting, sorry, specifically with these AI enabled cameras in town here. That's a little less voluntary because you can't choose. Well, you can choose which paths you take, but I mean, it's a little less voluntary if you want to go to the park. You get to choose if you download an app, but you can't choose whether this camera catches you or not. I know it's anonymous right now, but you can just see where some of these things are going.
I'm not particularly familiar with what you're discussing, the AI cameras that have been installed in town. I don't really understand the nature or what they're being used for. In fact, I hadn't heard of it until you mentioned it.
Oh, okay. I won't go too deep into it, but they've just installed these cameras from Rotary Park. It's a pilot program from this company in Oakville. It's pretty cool. It's a cool technology. But what it does is it lets people know if there's too many, or lets the town know if there's too many people in a public space, and it alerts them. And they come and check and kind of like advise people, hey, maybe there shouldn't be so many people here.
Right. I like the concept of that. I certainly have been disappointed, like many people, to see large gatherings of people across our country in parks and other places during COVID. So in theory, I'm not opposed to something that aids in the enforcement of our orders right now, which are to limit gatherings, et cetera, and to make sure we social distance.
Awesome. And it seems like it's done in a way that, again, protects privacy as well.
Right. Well, then I'd be 100% in favor of that.
Awesome. Awesome. So, as far as the recovery and the second wave goes, there are concerns that there is a second wave coming in September, or at least in the near future, or a future. And it took us more than 3 months to get the rescue package in a somewhat workable state. And as you've said yourself, the rental subsidy hasn't been fixed, and it doesn't look like it's going to. And I mean, even SEBA hasn't been rolled out fully to its full stages yet. I mean, it's August. Are we moving to recovery mode too quickly? And are we properly preparing for a second wave?
So on all of these kinds of things, the reopenings and stages, I agree with the approach that's being taken to trust the advice of the various medical officers, both nationally, provincially, and within our regional jurisdictions. So I think they're on top of it. I think in Ontario, we're now at our third day in a row with less than 100 COVID cases. I think we're at 24,000 tests a day. So we're at a pretty tiny number. I'm not as worried about a second wave. I think most Canadians are taking this very seriously. There are a few that aren't, and I think when we're going to find some challenges is when we are sending children back to school. Right? There's no good answers to this. I know that there's people who are saying the plan that's been rolled out is not good enough. I think it's being done with the best medical advice available, and there's no good answers. My kids missed a whole bunch of months of school, and I think we're going to have to try and do something. And I think the plans that are being put forward are the best plans available. And I really hope there isn't a second wave. I think we've gotten the numbers down to such small numbers. It's going to be difficult for us to have a really big explosive second wave.
Well, if we seem like we have a lot of things in order. We have the app out there now, which will help, and we seem to have a lot better understanding of what we're dealing with. So,
and I everywhere I go, people are wearing masks and washing their hands and disinfecting their hands. I think I don't see this in every store, and I hope we get to the point. I was recently in Quebec, and every store you go into, it's mandatory to disinfect your hands. Not every store that I see here is doing it or enforcing it. So I think if you're wearing a mask, anytime you enter a store and you properly disinfect your hands, we're going a pretty long way to preventing the spread of the virus, even if someone's infected.
I think so. I think so. So I have one more question left, but
Sure.
so what would you consider to be the biggest flaw in the federal government's response to COVID?
I think it's been, I'm going to say there's two things. Number one, really poor support for our farmers. Our farmers are really struggling in a whole bunch of different ways. We didn't touch on that. They're struggling from a lack of foreign foreign workers who normally come in to help with harvest, and not just with harvest, but with planting and everything else. And CERB has taken away the desire of most young students, etc., to work on farms. Even and Even people who were eligible for the summer student work program, some of those people aren't showing up to work on the farms because they can stay home and collect CERB. Combine that with uh, great reductions in purchases from the food sector. Combine that with challenges in foreign markets like China. Our farmers are really having a hard time, and there's been almost no support that's been put forward by the government for farmers. So that is a massive fail that we're going to feel the effects of down the road. And secondly, we've really not supported our small businesses as well as they should. We're losing a bunch. And if the wage subsidy is completely eliminated in December without some kind of a plan, I think we're going to see far, far greater business losses going down in the future. So those are the two real big things that I think the government has dropped the ball on.
Thank you for mentioning that, because I mean I'm not even aware of the lack of support for farmers. It's not something I've heard enough about. So I mean I'm glad. Thank you for bringing that up, and also for the support for small businesses, because I think there are a lot of people that are under the misconception that they're receiving a lot more support than they have been. So thank you for bringing
Yeah,
both those up.
no, absolutely. They're working hard. What I learned on my business tour is this: the businesses who are adapting, changing their model rapidly, are going to be able to survive. Some businesses are not changing at all, and they're going to have a tough time when all of the various support programs disappear, because the new norm is that Canadians aren't really feeling that comfortable going out and shopping and going to restaurants. And I think it's going to take a while for that to go away. And the government's going to need to support small business through that.
100%. I mean, I 100%. Awesome. So is there anything you'd like to say to the people of Dufferin before we wrap it up?
I think I've been pretty proud of the response in the riding in Dufferin and in the other part of my riding in Caledon. We've shown such great community support. I've highlighted a bunch of those things over the last few months, people who have really stepped up to contribute. It's really inspiring to see how many people, even though they're going through a really tough time, they decide, I'm going to try and help other people in my community. So been really blown away by the acts of kindness by many people all across Dufferin.
I'd agree. I don't know why I'm so surprised, but I really am. It's amazing to see. It's
It,
awesome. So what would you say is the best way to get in touch with you?
If you want to get in touch with me, you can always send me an email. My email address is kyle.seaback@parle.gc.ca. And the best phone number to reach me at is my number here in Orangeville, 519-941-1832.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, thank you. And we'll make sure to include your social media details in the post as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Social media is great, but if you're looking to get a response from me, I try and explain this. Posting on Facebook is really hit or miss, because I can have 10 posts going at the same time with multiple comment threads, and I'm not reading them all. So if you really want to get a response from me, call the office or send an email.
That makes a ton of sense. Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your time and for answering these questions. We really
No
appreciate it.
problem. Thanks, Josh.
Awesome. Thank you.